Good evening, viewers, and welcome back to the Tuesday show. I'm Jenny Fisher of East London News. I'm your host this evening, and we're going to this evening be running a themed show. We're going to be talking about climate change and specifically what councils can do about it. I'll explain that in a minute. But just to encourage you, first of all, if you would like to join into the programme, we have something of an expert on climate change here. So if you have a question, bring in and we'll see if we can answer it. Or if you disagree, or if you want to agree with us on air, put your opinion forward, then please phone in. You can phone us on 0208 12345 07. The number's on the screen there. And also, if you're a bit shy, because I know some viewers sometimes are a bit shy, and you prefer to write your questions, then you can actually come through to us on Facebook. You can put your question in the comments box. So now let's move on to our guests, and I'd like to welcome Councillor Paul Donovan from Redbridge, who's joining us tonight. Hi, Paul. We specialise in councillors from Redbridge called Paul, so welcome to Paul number 2 from Redbridge. Please, no spats on air. Paul is a spring chicken as well. Anyway, that's that sorted out. So, but first, let's find out a little bit more about you, Paul. Climate change or being a Labour councillor? Which came first? What were you attracted to first of all?
Well, the two things came together in a way, because I was elected to the council in 2018, and I've been very committed on climate change prior to that in terms of writing, because I'm a journalist when I'm not counselling, and also grow my own food and that type of thing. So yeah, I've been sort of committed to the issue for a long time, a few decades really. But and then the council is about what we could do on council to address the issues.
So was it actually climate change that drew you onto the council, made you wake up, oh, I could go on the council and try to do something there?
Well, partly that, and partly just represent the local community and see what we could do.
Which ward do you represent, Paul?
Wanstead Village.
Oh, that sounds very rural. Is it?
It's less rural than it sounds. It's we've got a lot of parks. We've got Wanstead Park and the Christchurch Green. We've got a lot of open space and greenery around here for a sort of outer London area, I guess, which is good.
Yes. I mean, obviously, it's quite unlike us in Tower Hamlets. If we have any open space or greenery, we build a tower block on it. So we know what open space is for. Anyway, let's sort of try to move on to climate change. You've been working on the council to try to get the council actually to do something. So how did you begin? What did you begin to... I guess it wasn't as easy as just writing a strategy and getting the council to do it. I guess there was a bit of persuading involved. How did it all start?
Well, I mean, the first thing we did was, within the ward, within the Wanstead area, we set up a group called Cleaner, Greener Wanstead, which had a number of strands that involved a lot of local activists. And those strands were about biodiversity, about active travel, about taking personal action, about dealing with litter and plastics, and having more sustainable buildings. So we had those sort of strands, and partly as a result of that, we took that forward into the council, and that's informed some of the things that have been done in council going forward. But the first major thing, I guess, was bringing the climate emergency motion to council in June 2019, and that sort of declared an emergency of what we've got to do. And then from that, the council set up a climate panel, climate panel, and then we also had a nature and environment strategy task and finish group, which was to look at more at the biodiversity side of things. And so those things sort of fit together, and they've been moving forward. So we've now got a climate action plan, and the biodiversity task and finish we just actually reported last night.
Oh.
That should be going forward. And we've also got a green urban landscape policy as well. So those three things should fit together, and
Well, if you
hopefully start us on the road, so to speak. Well, maybe not.
well, start you on the path, yes. Start you on the cycle lane, yes.
Yes.
So if the council declared a climate emergency back in 2019, goodness, that's even before COVID, then surely the council must have got a lot done by now.
Well, it's been slow going. I mean, as you say, with COVID, COVID has sort of slowed things down. So, if we hadn't have had COVID, things would have moved a lot more rapidly. But COVID sort of has knocked us all offline. But at the same time, COVID has also shown what an emergency means. So we've seen this at national level, we've seen it at local level, and we've seen how in an emergency how you deal with an emergency, and COVID is that example worldwide. And what we need is the same urgency about climate change and biodiversity loss. And we're beginning to get there. I think we're beginning to get there, but that's across the world. But it can be a slow business.
Indeed. Can we try to sort of dig down into some of these words that you've thrown out? Because I'm not quite sure what all of them mean exactly. You assembled people in your ward to talk about, what you say, biodiversity. What can a group of people in a very small area do to improve biodiversity? I mean, I suspect we just ought to give up on biodiversity in the inner city.
We've got some sort of civil society groups. So we've got a group. There's a group called Wild Wanstead. There's Wanstead Climate Action. There's the Cleaner Greener Wanstead group, which was the one I mentioned earlier. We've got Wanstead Community Gardeners, which is a bit of a different thing. So I mean, they all do different things, and they're active people in the community, in the society. And so, as well as that, we just got people that we put out publicity about the meeting, and we just people come who are concerned, and there are a lot of people concerned, people with kids and grandchildren, and people without kids and grandchildren, and it's an issue that affects everyone, and everyone's concerned about. And so there wasn't any problem getting people interested, if you like.
Really, that's good. So, in terms of biodiversity, what can local people actually do?
Well, one of the big initiatives that started in our ward and started in our area was grow zones. So we'd take an area and you let it run wild. Well, you let it run wild, or you might plant it with some wild plants, some wild seeds, and then you sort of let it go like that, and the biodiversity grows from there. So we've had a number of those. We've got some in central Wanstead and around the place, and part of the processes I mentioned earlier, going to the committee and also in the green landscape policy, is that the grow zone thing is going to be extended out across the borough now, because it's been successful here. I mean, the only thing is with things like that is that you need to communicate with people that what you're actually doing, because otherwise, if they just see a lot of grass that isn't cut, they might think the council just can't be bothered to cut the grass, which is of course wrong. We're doing it deliberately to increase biodiversity. So, but you need to make that link with people and communicate what's going on. But
I think in the old days we used to call that guerrilla gardening. Before the establishment.
The ones that community gardeners are guerrillas. That is their raison d'etre, if you like. Well, they may be slightly tamed now, but they might not like to hear that. But
I'm sure they like their biodiversity. Okay, so that's bringing a little bit of biodiversity to the city. I see. But you also mentioned active travel. What on earth is that?
Well, active travel is when you bring in things like controlled parking zones. You bring in cycle lane. You give cycle lanes. And you encourage. Well, it's the mayor's aim of for 2040, I think it is, to have 80% of people using public transport, cycle or walking. So
this is the Mayor of London, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's to get people out of their cars really, and on these other ways of travelling. I mean, there's obviously been some controversy over that in various London boroughs that have. You've had the low traffic neighbourhoods that the government was trying to get councils to take on, and many have taken them on and have done that. But it's something you've got to communicate and consult on very well, and take people along with you, because there can be opposition, because people don't always recognise the value of it immediately, if you like.
Well, certainly that's what we found in Tower Hamlets, where a lot of our traffic is actually through traffic. And our various projects, we had on the council one called Livable Streets, which if you say it quickly sounds very much like Liverpool Street. So a lot of people were quite confused as to why we were so interested in a tube station just off the fringe of the west of the borough. But once we got over that, it affected us very badly, because a lot of people who did have to make local journeys, and it literally is like, parents taking disabled children to school in a car. And it's also, for all the gentrification in Tower Hamlets, large parts of our borough still have quite close-knit communities where people do support each other, their neighbours, their extended families. And the people who do this work, usually women, were just not able to get around as easily. So, and some of the smaller streets had vast amounts of traffic shifted off of them onto the main roads. That was as clear, you could see it. So it wasn't a great success, and was probably one of the main reasons behind the Labour Party losing a recent by-election, because people were just so fed up. Life's hard enough as it is, and the more these things are thrown at you. It seemed to be a scheme designed to make life difficult for local residents who were not necessarily the problem, and who, because of the scheme, had to do great detours to get out of little pockets of the borough. It wasn't good at all. Oh, and we also had a few lost ambulances as well, and we were not happy about that. So it's been difficult for us. But you haven't tried them in Wanstead, in Redbridge?
Yeah, we haven't done that. I mean, we had a quieter streets process, which was a bit like that, but then there was quite a lot of opposition. That was tried in Ilford during the lockdown period, but it was dropped fairly quickly because there was a lot of opposition, and some of the problems you just mentioned there caused a lot of trouble. But I mean, that sort of scheme you're describing is a sort of mini Holland type thinking, which is that you drive the traffic, what traffic there is, you drive it out of the side roads and onto the main arteries. And I mean, a borough that's done that quite successfully is Waltham Forest.
Oh yeah,
they've brought in their scheme, and it's been successful, and it's having real benefits in terms of improvement in health, less car ownership. Well, if you count less car ownership as a good measure, but improvement in people's health. And it has settled in, but there's been a lot of obstacles to overcome. Some of the type you've mentioned there. I mean, one of the difficulties with this thing is that quite often the Labour councils are the most progressive on these issues, and but they're sort of having low transport neighbourhoods pushed on them by government during the period of COVID, if you like, and say implement them, and we'll give you the money. But and then the Labour councillors are getting the blame on the ground for it, having been sort of pushed, and actually, particularly irritatingly, being niggled by their Tory opponents about the thing, which is coming. The actual policy is coming from above. So although we might agree with the principles and want to do it, and some of the difficulties, I mean, in Redbridge, we just felt we didn't have enough consultation time with people, and enough time to communicate, to let them know what was going on, so get them on board. So that was backed up, and it's very difficult, because once the thing gets a bit of a bad name, it's difficult. You can bring in other things, and you can learn from that and bring in different types of scheme. But then people's antennae go up immediately. They think something's come and split their car. But I mean, the problem is, I mean, a big problem we've had, my constant irritation here is that, as you said, it is quite green and leafy here, and people are quite committed to the environment. But they also want their cars. They want to be able to drive everywhere, and they also want a better environment for their children and their children's children. So, you can't have both really, and we've got to find compromises.
Indeed, yes. Well, we could discuss that one all night, and maybe one night we will. But I do think 2040 is a long time away, and I suspect even Sadiq Khan may not be in office still when it comes to 2040. But I think that's a very tall order, and I think it's quite personally, I think it's quite short-sighted. Yes, there's a lot of problem with emissions, but cars will be getting cleaner, as we know. Boris tells us so.
Yeah.
And sometimes the convenience of public transport just, isn't there. We don't have the investment in public transport. I suspect if public transport were great, a lot of people would happily use it without being told it was an option.
Yeah.
But I live in Tower Hamlets. When I worked in Hackney, it took me 2 hours to get to work or back using 2 different buses on long routes, 20 minutes in the car, and that's the trouble. You can't sort of fight that. Anyway.
Well, the whole economy needs to change on that. I mean, for years we've had this ridiculous situation where, you should, if you're doing the right environmental thing, you should be using a train to go from here to Liverpool or to the Midlands or to Brighton or whatever. But 9 out of 10 times it's cheaper to get in the car. Certainly if there's more than one of you. And even worse, it has been at times it's been cheaper to get on the plane. So until you change those indices in terms of the economy, you're not going to get towards those numbers of people out of their car and onto the other options. I'm sure people will be very keen to get onto the other options, but they've got to be made cheaper and they've got to be made more accessible.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there was a time during the COVID lockdown where people were noticing bird song and things like that, wasn't there? And, and saying, well, can we find a way forward in the future? Can we rebuild back better, or whatever? With much less use of transport and with working from home seeming to work in many cases, it seems that we could. And then it was all abandoned, wasn't it? You've got to go to work so you can buy your sandwiches and keep the high street alive.
I mean, the trouble with it, I mean, the COVID thing, on the one hand, it showed, as I say, it showed an emergency and how you respond to an emergency. And we've got to take the climate and the environment crisis in exactly the same way because of what it's going to cause. But, as you say, in the early days, we had cars were off the road, bird song was heard, people were reconnecting, if you like. And it seemed to be a different way. But then we went to don't get on public transport because of COVID. And then suddenly everyone was back in their car going everywhere. And I mean, a particularly interesting set of contradictions to me is the person who sits in their car with their mask on their own, polluting the outside, for other people standing outside. So, that's sort of, in a way, highlights some of the anomalies of the thing.
Yeah. Okay, so we may need to look at the bigger picture, really, to tackle some of these smaller things. But let's just have a quick explanation. What is a green urban landscape? Why do you want one? And do you think other councils could do the same thing?
Well, it's a policy of sort of trying to green things up, if you like. If you in terms of development, I mean, in the government are bringing the Environment Bill, which will become the Environment Act soon, I think, as bringing in net biodiversity gain. So when developers are building houses or blocks and things, they're going to have to put in a certain percentage of biodiversity gain. So that's going to help. I mean, it would be, it is a good idea. The policy is a good idea because it's about going forward in a holistic way with the green biodiversity as part of the process, not an add-on. somewhere, but as part of that process. I mean, I don't know if people would have probably seen some of these Earthshot programs that have been on the TV. And I mean, there was one there in Singapore where they've got green walls and they've got lots of trees and they're making sort of garden cities. And so I think that's a very, very good example of of where you could go with it.
I mean, what I don't understand, in a borough which has had a lot of development over the last 40 years, is why we haven't tackled sort of energy as we have built all these new flats.
Oh, absolutely.
There's no policy saying, requiring developers to have solar panels, wind turbines, or to be responsible for generating their own electricity. I wonder if really we should, in terms of the green urban landscape, be looking at our planning policies. But I suppose, again, those are government given, really, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there were moves to change some of the planning in terms of zero carbon and stuff. But I believe that was one of the Tories' early moves was to reverse all that, or certainly put the date back into the why blue yonder sort of thing. But I mean, for sure. I mean, a long time ago we should. I mean, new houses should all be zero carbon. They should all be sustainable. But
yes. Well, talking about
this is the overall frustration about talking the talk but just not walking the walk. You go to Paris, we agree all these things, and then they don't produce the money to give to what they like to call the developing world to make their transitions, and so they can develop things in a sustainable way. It's a lot of hot air, and this is why this COP26 thing, we can't have a lot more hot air. We've got to have some actual action.
Well, we've had some action today, haven't we? Because the Tory Prime Minister has announced his green strategy today. We didn't know he was going to do it when we planned this programme. But so he's trying to help electric vehicles and homeowners who might be changing their gas boiler. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look through the strategy, Paul, but what do you make of it? Do you think Boris is showing us the way forward?
Well, it's in the right direction. I mean, we need. I mean, there's the commitment to the electric cars. I think it's 2030. They're looking for no more non-electric cars and electric vehicles. And this hydrogen thing. But I mean, journalists have already picked up on, again, that they're not putting the sort of money behind it that is needed to make the sort of that they talk big figures, but big figures in terms of delivery on this, but. You've got to put the money behind it. You've got to put the infrastructure behind it. You've got to make it happen. It's no good. I mean, Boris is quite good at talking about stuff that, doesn't always happen, dare I suggest.
Well, that's what we found out when he was Mayor of London, wasn't it?
But I mean, it's important also. I mean, it's important that journalists and politicians, and he's held to account to deliver this because, I mean, the COP26 thing is very important, as I think we all understand, if we're going to sort of save the world from climate disaster. And the UK's got a central role as chair, I think, with Italy. But I mean, you've got to have moral in this situation. You have to have a moral authority, and if you're not doing the job, if you're not walking the walk yourself, no one's going to listen to your talk.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? With this announcement today, it seems to be that Boris has announced some funding. Journalists, commentators have mocked him because it's so little. But what's behind that seems to be, I think what he said was, essentially, if he I'm putting words into his mouth here, but he seems to be having his strategy seems to be, if public money is spent pump priming these various markets, then the private sector will have to follow suit and will be affected. And you can see that, in terms of electric vehicles, now the law is there, other non-electric vehicles are going to end. Obviously, manufacturers are going to be falling over themselves to build the cars that people are going to have to buy. They're not going to carry on saying, no, we're going to carry on building these obsolete cars. Nobody actually, is going to be able to drive. They're not going to do that. So, maybe the money he's putting into that doesn't have to be that much. Maybe the private sector will deliver. That's what capitalism's supposed to do, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe the pump primary will work, but I mean, obviously the price of these things has got to come down, because I mean, I'm sure there's lots and lots of people out there that would like to have electric vehicles, but I mean, they're very expensive still. So you know, you got to bring down the price. I mean, once they're a reasonable price, especially when everyone's been queuing up around the petrol stations for their petrol, I should imagine that'd be an incentive for even more people to get an electric car.
Absolutely. So, what have you done in Redbridge, coming back to what councils can do, to support people to get electric cars in terms of charging points? Because there's no point having an electric car if you can't charge it. So, how have you handled providing charging points?
I mean, we've rolled out a lot of electric charging points recently. So we've got quite a few in this part of the borough, and right across the borough, because we got some funding for the electric charging points, and people were able to put in, and if they wanted one, or for use for their car, then a lot were distributed. So yeah, we have rolled out quite a lot of them, and there's more coming. So that's important, because I mean the other thing, I mean, you have to look at the whole infrastructure of that's changing with the need to address climate and biodiversity, because you know, you've got obviously electric charging points. You've got places where people can stop their car to get charged. We've got other situation where people are, you know, they've got solar panels on their houses, and then they can use that if they've got a battery system. They can use that to charge their car up. So that in many ways is quite an ideal way of doing things, but you know, that's another way. And so, you know, you've got the street infrastructure, the street architecture, if you want, it's going to change to adjust to these things. But yeah, I mean, we are rolling those things out here, and we, you know, also the cycle hangers, and we're getting more cycle. We're gradually getting more cycle lanes and such like. So it is all happening. It is all changing. But
what's a cycle hanger?
A cycle hanger is one of those green sort of little sheds almost. It's not really a very good description, but and you can put about six. I think it's about 6 bikes in there. So people pay an annual fee, and then they get access to it. They can put it in there, and they can keep their bike safely in there, get it in and out. And I mean, there's a big in Waltham Forest. They've got quite a lot of them. So have Newham, and we're getting going on them. So we're rolling them out in Redbridge. But yeah, if you want to see a big cycle hangers, I mean, in Waltham Forest they've got big one near Leighton Station, and which is a huge thing. It's standing up, and people have got access, and they can put their bike. I don't know how many bikes that takes. It takes a lot of bikes, but again, they're sort of being loud and proud about it, which is, I think, you've got to do. You've got to be loud and proud, because you know, whether you're talking about cycle hangers, cycle ring for people to lock up to, greening of the highways, planting more trees. You know, you're changing the architecture. You're changing the living architecture around us and the way we live. I mean, if we don't do, I mean, that's all part of increasing people's consciousness, if you like.
Yes. Oh, that sounds sort of private parking for your bike. That sounds like a good idea. Because what we do is that we're more inner city than you are. So what we do with cycle hangers in Tower Hamlets is unscrew them from the pavement and then walk off with the bikes. But I'm sure that doesn't happen in leafy Redbridge.
Oh, I'm sure it does.
Okay, so well, that's the electric charging points. What I don't really understand is, I don't know if you do either, is what Boris has announced today about replacing gas boilers. And I'm not really sure why gas boilers have to go, but we're all supposed to install low carbon heat pumps, which apparently are going to heat homes by pumping in air from outside, which I totally don't understand. Do you know anything about this household heating
Well,
plan?
I mean, the gas boiler problem is the fossil fuels. You know, they needed to create the gas, so that's why they want to get rid of the gas. But I mean, you've got the heat pumps, which I think go down in the ground and bring up heat. Hydrogen. I mean, I don't know what the sources are for hydrogen because I'm not. There's no network of hydrogen as far as I'm aware. So I mean, there's a lot of work needs to be done on that. I mean, they seem to talk more about that than they do about solar panels and this type of stuff, which is already a technology that's already here. So, I mean, obviously that's restricted to certain buildings, but quite a lot of them can use those.
Absolutely, and even if you can't use a solar panel for 100% of your household energy needs, then you can use it for a good percentage, I'm sure. I've never understood why, they didn't just require all new build to have solar panels everywhere and individual household wind turbines.
Yeah.
And then all the problem we've got to deal with is, right, how do we make up the deficit?
Yeah. I mean, the Tories have been, frankly, appalling on the solar panels and such like. I mean, when in 2010, when we last had a Labour government, we had the feed-in tariffs, which were very generous initially, and lots of people had got solar panels, got those 25-year deals, and that was pumping the market. That was getting the thing moving. And a lot of industry built up around that, people fitting them, people making them, and all the rest of it. The whole green, we were well on our way to being ahead of the game, if you like, on in terms of green industry and green jobs and green infrastructure. But then in come the Tories, and Mr. Green Cameron and his Huskies immediately start cutting the feed-in tariffs to the point where now I don't think there's any feed-in tariff at all. And sort of the industry sort of declined, and that all that gain from that move by the Labour government was lost. Well, most of it was lost.
Absolutely, yeah. No, even I noticed that. So yes, it must be right. I mean, I don't know why the Brits find it so difficult to grasp the concept of feed-in tariffs and harvesting the energy that's around you as an individual household. They've been doing it in Germany for years, and I think that country is now sort of really quite well placed to deal with the domestic energy requirements.
I mean, we're in Ireland. I mean, one of the biggest energy sources around this island is sea power. It's a waste, as well as obviously the offshore wind. But I mean, things are happening now with wave power. But I mean, that's a huge amount of huge energy source there to be tapped into.
Did they ever build the Severn barrage? Was it the Severn barrage?
Well, there was the one that was sort of going to happen, and then they knocked it on there, didn't they? So I don't know what happened.
Something. I remember that it must have been 1989. There was a bill crawling slowly through Parliament, which was, it was very controversial as to whether to build a barrage across whatever bay it was in southern Wales. So I don't know the ins and outs of that. And I think wave power is a little bit controversial because it's not necessarily all kind to the environment. But got a bit of wind power. Anyway, so that's all the different powers. I think you're right. Ed Miliband has responded to Boris's strategy, apparently, saying there's not enough in the plans on delivery, and that we've all been waiting months for a heat and building strategy, and he sees this as a massive letdown. So there we are, very emphatic from Ed Miliband. And perhaps a bit of wanting from the Prime Minister. So maybe we're going to have to bite the bullet, as it were, and go for a nuclear option. What do you think about that?
We don't really want that. I mean, I know people talk about the mix and such like, but I mean, the danger of nuclear, is huge. I mean, if you look at Fukushima and what happened there, which caused most, dare I say it, sensible countries to back away from it as quickly as they could. And I mean, it's also expensive. It takes a long time to deliver. And the other sources are better sources are there. The renewable source is a better source, and it's a cheaper source, particularly now. And so I would focus on that rather than nuclear, which I think is opening up a big problem.
Well, I totally agree with you. I think it's utterly ridiculous. It's a target for those who want to mount terrorist attacks. It's at the mercy of extreme weather, and it's just bloody dangerous. If it goes wrong, then you're just wiped out your country and quite a few others, chunks of nearby countries. But I don't know if this has really hit the headlines, but I did notice this in the BBC reporting, that the government is going to spend £120 million, which doesn't actually sound all that much, but it is apparently, to develop SMRs, which apparently are small modular nuclear reactors that can be built in a factory and can be, essentially they're mini reactors. Apparently Rolls-Royce is very keen on building them, although some critics say that the technology is quite ready. So there you are. We could all have a little nuclear reactor in our back garden. That would be nice. No, it wouldn't. So do councils have a role to play in, is it COP26, this conference that's going to happen in a couple of weeks?
Yeah.
Do councils have a role to play in that? Should they be taking notes?
I think probably lobbying, for options that can be done at council level. I mean, and obviously a bit of money from government won't go amiss, not just on the environment, but on many other issues that local councils are doing. And you go back to COVID and the track. If you've run out the track and trace thing through local authorities, initially, I think things would have got moving a lot quicker. Local authorities did very well with the various things they were tasked to do on COVID, and it's the same in all areas. But I mean, this government seems to be very not particularly a friend of the local authorities. It doesn't want to give them the autonomy to do things and the money to back it up. Which is, I think if we did do that, we could move on this agenda a lot quicker, probably.
Yes, I mean, again, that sort of works in terms of the UK. But you mentioned already, that it's a global climate change. So there's got to be some global answers. Do you think we can actually get some at COP26, or are we going to fail again?
Well, they seem to have a process there. I mean, they've got these national delivery programs that people have put forward. After Paris, and then they're supposed to be going into them and seeing whether they're delivering or whether they're not delivering, and then they're going back and talking more and how is it going to happen. So I mean, they seem to have a process there, but I mean, it's obviously got to happen. I mean, you have got the big emitters in terms of carbon, like China and the US, India, and Russia. So we've got these countries have really got to take it on board as well. I mean, in terms of addressing, I mean, we are actually quite a small emitter in a way compared to them. Not that that's not a reason for us not to be doing what we're doing, sort of thing, or doing more than what we're doing.
Well, it's quite different, isn't it? If you compare the actual size of the country, or the population of the country, I think you get quite different results. But it doesn't really fill me with hope, the idea that states, Russia, China, India, I mean, you're not talking about a group of friends there, are you? Really.
No. I mean, this is the thing. This is one of the big problems. I mean, what we need is sort of a combined action, unity on this issue, not people, trying to score a few points and make some trade benefits out of it and get ahead of the game by saying you've got to do this, we're not going to do it, or we've already done it. And this type of thing, which to score points all the time, to continue to have this sort of rampant nationalism is not really the way to address this issue, which needs unity, and it needs it doesn't need a new Cold War between the West and China, for example. It needs cooperation on all levels.
Well, perhaps we have to give the COP countries a bit of a push. Perhaps we can't just leave it to them. What's your opinion on the protests? Obviously, is it Extinction Rebellion got a lot of press coverage, through some quite daring protests, and had to come back, with the, oh my goodness, should you be protesting in this way? Well, you didn't give us any press coverage when we weren't, that argument. But it seems to have gone a step further now with the Insulate protests, which have been really intrusive. So, but do you think we all have to, again, sort of grit our teeth and go out and stand in the road? Is that the way forward to make governments take this seriously?
It's an interesting thing. I mean, if you actually look at the way the media covers these direct actions by Extinction Rebellion or Insulate, they start saying, you're disrupting normal life, you're disrupting people's lives, and then they will turn around and say, well, yes, we are, because that's exactly what we're saying, that we can't go on with the normal. We need a new normal, or we need a new way of doing things. And then they got the media, the person asking the questions, the journalist, will then sort of finish the item, and then we'll go on to some disaster that is climate related in another part of the world, and there's no linkage going on there, no thought process. But I mean, I think direct action always happens. I mean, it's got a tradition. You go back to the peace movement, you go back to Green and Common, and the anti-war movement still going on. And it's if you go through the normal processes of writing to your MPs, writing to your councillors, going, all the conventional, if you want, the conventional ways of dealing with things, and you're not getting the progress that you think you should be getting, then people move to this sort of peaceful direct action or whatever. I mean, I think it was the point was raised last night, I think on Newsnight, about who where the Insulate people, where they're sort of standing in roads and things and stopping people there is where they should be focusing. And maybe, I think it might have been Caroline Lucas, the Green Party woman, said that they would do better to be outside the Treasury or something, because they're the centre of power, they're the people that are making the decisions. So I mean, there's some value in that argument, I guess.
Yes, well, certainly I a story at my own expense here, but I spent 4 hours on the M25 2 weeks ago, queuing to get off the M25, and a journey which usually takes an hour and a half took me 6 hours. So I was sat in this 4-hour queue thinking to myself, bloody Insulate, why are they protesting on the bit of motorway that I'm driving along or trying to get off of? And I thought this for the whole 4 hours before I got to the front of the queue, and found out it wasn't actually Insulate, it was a broken traffic light that had caused a 4-hour tailback. So
you're unfairly blaming the direct actors.
Yeah, I blamed them, and they hadn't even done it. It was Department of whatever looks after big roads that had messed up its own traffic light mending system. Apparently, it was a very complex repair, so that's why it couldn't be done in under a fortnight. They told me. So Insulate got a bit of extra publicity there from people like me sat in the queue who thought that they were out protesting, and they weren't, or at least not there. So so there we are. So let's the last couple of minutes remaining. Let's think about the future then. What can people who live in Redbridge, we'll take them first, what can they do to actually make a change, to actually help Redbridge combat climate change? What can they do in Redbridge?
Well, I think on an individual, I think you've got two things. You've got what council can do, you've got what government can do. And I mean, there's obviously important actions that both can take to address the issues. But I mean, when we had our climate panel, the research for the final report and then the action plan, I mean, it was found that only 2.4% of emissions are actually council generated, if you want. So it was a case of trying to a big role is as a sort of activator of getting people to act, and other businesses to act and deal with their emissions and biodiversity challenges as well. So, I mean, I think basically we've all got to go through a conversion, in the way we live. I mean, we've got to drive less, we've got to fly less, we've got to probably eat less meat. And travel by more sustainable ways, and in terms of our houses, get away from fossil fuels. I mean, these are the things we've got to try and do, and not use plastic as much as possible. Try and phase that out, and a lot of the waste and the rubbish that we're clogging up the air and the sea with. So I mean, we can all do something. We can all, the power of one. We can all do something, and then if people come together and the consciousness builds up on that, then we can make a big difference. So I mean, there's the two levels really. There's what government, whether local, national, international, can do, and there's a big role there, and it hasn't. More can be done, and we've got to hope more comes after the COP26 thing. But as I say, I think we need personal revolutions if you want personal change in the way we act. And I mean, even I don't think people are really, and in some ways that can almost be going back to a simpler way of life, where you're actually treading on the earth more lightly. You're creating. We keep talking. We've got new waste policy in Redbridge, and we keep talking about we've got to stop creating the stuff. It's good. We increase recycling rates. That's great, and dealing with the rubbish. But we've got to stop creating the rubbish in the first place. I think there can be a thing where you think, "Oh, I'm recycling. I'm doing the right thing," which you are doing the right thing. But better still, don't create the rubbish. And obviously, shopping locally, farmers markets, community markets, all this stuff. Reusing, recycling clothing and all these sorts of things. We've got to get away from this consumer, buy it, throw it away immediately, and we just got to get away from that. And I think there are signs of that happening, particularly over the COVID period. In this area, there's been a lot of exchanging of things and recycling stuff, and so I think we have leapt forward on those things. But there's a long way to go.
Isn't it quite complicated though? Because I can understand, things like clothing. Just take one example. I mean, I can make a T-shirt last 20 years, always have done. Really disappointed if anything gives out before 20 years. But if people are not, and some people, younger people, sometimes buy a couple of tops a week and then don't wear them again because they've worn them once, so have a much higher turnover. But without that turnover of new clothing, then the clothing companies are not able to exploit workers in Bangladesh and other countries out in the Asian subcontinent and further into Asia. Those companies then can't make their money. The people in the sweatshops in those countries are out of a job. So there's a downside to not having such a turnover of clothing as well, isn't there?
Yeah, but I mean that's consumer capitalism for you, isn't it? Really, I mean that's the model that's brought us to the crisis point. I mean, obviously, we need to get off that model into a new model where we're wasting less and we're treading on the earth more lightly. And how we get off that model, like the people you just mentioned, but people working and creating these garments and things. We've got to find either new work for them or maybe new in green industries and stuff like this. Not just sort of chuck them on the heat because people are not buying 10 shirts a day or whatever. But we've got to get. I mean, there's almost there's been a sort of very destructive culture of almost buy it and throw it away, use it once and throw it away, and whether it's clothing, whether it's or food products or whatever. I mean, there's a thing about a third of the food that is wasted in the world. I mean, we've got to stop wasting food. I mean, I don't know how people do it. I mean, I don't create loads of food waste. The waste I've got is usually greenery, which I use in the compost bin. So, but the amount of waste that people create is absolutely incredible. I mean, think we've all got to look at ourselves. We've also got pressure on governments, local authorities, and all the rest of it for the change. Because without it, we're heading over the cliff, really.
So you mentioned right at the beginning that when you started evolving the climate change strategy in Redbridge, you started with the grassroots, bringing people together at a local level. Now that the strategy is there and you've got an action plan, is that based on bringing people together locally, or has the council now taken over?
No, I mean we've got forums that are taking things on and still trying to keep people involved and take the issues further and deeper. So the idea is to try and keep people engaged in the process, because we want active citizens. We don't want people that are just told, "Oh, go and do that for us, will you?" And ideally not pay for it. Go and do some volunteer work. But I mean, we want people to be actively involved, but in a partnership way, if you like.
Okay. And are your MPs supportive of what the council's doing, or have they got their own busyness to do?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, John Cllr was part. John Cllr came when we had out the first meetings for the Cleaner Greener Wanstead thing. He's Leighton and Wanstead MP. He's been supportive of things. I mean, he's our main one here. I mean, West Streeting is in Ilford North and Sam Tower is in Ilford South. So I mean, I think they're supportive as well. But yeah, so I mean, I think they're all supportive.
Okay, good. That's right. So that covers sort of both angles. So what about people in other boroughs? Finally, that are perhaps not as advanced as Redbridge in terms of involving the community in a very active green strategy. What would you advise people who've been listening to this and thinking, well, I'm concerned about my local environment, I'm concerned about my own local wastage, I'm concerned about the future of my children. People who are perhaps thinking of becoming councillors next May. What can they actually do now to get the ball rolling in their own boroughs? What would you recommend?
Well, I mean, if they come together in groups and sort of and lobby their councillors, lobby their MPs, and actually just get doing stuff. I mean, community gardens. There's money available that for some of the small projects and things. If people put in applications, so I mean, I would just say get out there and do it, really. And I mean. I think a lot of the boroughs are interested in empowering people, but I mean, people just have to make sure that, as I say, that you're actually being empowered. You're part of the process. You're not actually just being, used as cheap labour, shall I say?
Absolutely. Well, some good notes.
Not that any Labour council would ever do that, of course.
You can say that, Paul. I couldn't possibly comment. But it's been lovely talking to you. I think it's been very informative and potentially very encouraging for our audience to take this issue of climate change, of worrying about the environment, and thinking through how they, in their localities or on the council, how they can actually do something to bring about some change. So thank you very much. I hope you come back in the future and update us on the strategy and how things are going in Redbridge. But for now, thank you very much, Councillor Paul Donovan.
Thank you.
Great.
I mean, just I mean, I'm optimistic, really, more optimistic now than for a long time, to be honest.
Good.
So yeah, great. Thank you.
I hope the people of East London have heard that, and if Paul can be optimistic, then we can all rise to the occasion and join up. And you never know, we might actually begin to get some East London-wide focus groups, and we can lobby Boris and lobby Sadiq as well. This is the man who Sadiq doesn't go down too well in our locality, Paul, because much as he may be a champion of cycles and fresh air, he did sanction the building of a bridge and a motorway through Fish Island.
Oh,
Yes. We refer to that as vandalism, and we're not going to forgive him easily for that. Even John Biggs opposed that measure. So there we go. But nevertheless, we can all work forward together on this thing. So again, thank you, Paul. And hopefully you'll report back to us in due course. So good night, Paul. And I'm just going to wrap up now by thanking you for watching. We're going to be doing a bit of development on the Tuesday show over the next few weeks. So please keep tuned. let us know what's going on in your area, because we would love to cover more very local issues. You don't have to come on for the whole programme. We're very happy to give you just a short interview with you and let you and help you then to broadcast your concerns to the wider community. But we hope we've got some interesting speakers lined up as well. So make a note in your diary, 10 o'clock next Tuesday. We'll see you there. Good night.